Well, hello everyone, and welcome back. This is video number 3 with Mike Sullivan over here and myself. I'm Don Preston. In response to Sam Frost and Jeremiah Nortier, they've made a couple of videos now in their attempt, rather futile, I might add, to refute covenant eschatology. And so Michael and I have been pointing out some of the arguments that they have made. And one of the things that we have pointed out and that we want to call attention to by those who are watching both, and that is we ask you, to pay particular attention to how Sam Frost and Joseph actually ignore the main points that we are making. They start answering arguments that we did not make and then declare, see, everybody agrees with us. A prime example of that, before we really get into what we want to do today, is Michael and I were talking about the charge of Gnosticism that has been leveled against full preterism. Now, the argument is that preterism is Gnostic. It's Gnostic-like. They actually made the initial charge of being Gnostic. When we cornered them on that, basically, they backed off and said, we've never said it's true Gnosticism. Well, they sure used the term a lot. So we pointed out that in the 19th century, there were a lot of scholars who accused Paul of being a Gnostic, because in Romans chapter 8, he used the language, those who are in the flesh cannot be pleasing to God. That's the, quote, language, unquote, of Gnosticism. And Paul says, you are not in the flesh, but in the Spirit. Oh, my goodness. And so we pointed out that men such as Tom Holland understand that language is not talking about biological flesh, talking about a way of life. So what does Sam Frost do? He drags out Tom Holland and he reads Tom Holland, who is a futurist, where Tom Holland in Romans chapter 8 talks about the corporate body, but individual participation in the corporate body, resurrection at the end of time, and says, see, Preston and Sullivan are wrong. Tom Holland is a futurist. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we never denied that. We both know that. We were not arguing whether or not Tom Holland is a futurist. We were pointing out that Tom Holland understands that the language of you are not in the flesh sounds Gnostic, but it's not Gnostic. And hey, you know what? Sam Frost knows that the language itself, if you want to go into the Nag Hammadi, scriptures, to use that term, you can find language like that, Gnostic language like that. But Sam Frost knows, guess what? That's Gnostic. This is Paul, never the twain meet. And so for the finger to be pointed at full preterists and say, oh, you're like Gnostics. You are Gnostic-like. No, we're not. We're not at all. And if we are Gnostic, because we take some passages, such as 2 Peter chapter 3, figuratively, there are an awful lot of wonderful scholars, all of whom were futurists, who took 2 Peter chapter 3 as applicable to AD 70. Does Frost and Nortier say that some of the great Reformed teachers of the past, do they say they're Gnostic because they took a spiritual application? No, they don't do that. But since Gnosticism and Gnostic are red flags,
scare tactics.
They are scare tactics. They're poisoning the well tactics.
Absolutely.
They are they're handy to use, but they're pejorative. No, you can't say anything else about it. They're pejorative labels that they can throw at us when they know very good and well tons and tons and tons of notable scholars have taken passages like 2 Peter chapter 3. And oh, by the way, it should be noted that Kenneth Gentry, whom Frost admires a great deal, who supports Frost in his anti-preterist teachings, when it comes to Revelation 21, in the book, Navigating the Book of Revelation, a little small book, not very big, Kenneth Gentry, speaking of the new heaven and new earth, says, contrary to popular opinion, this is not talking about the consummate new heaven and the new earth, but rather the new creation that came in AD 70. Oh my goodness. Is Kenneth Gentry now going Gnostic on us?
Exactly. Well, yeah, let me say just a couple things on Holland and then what you're saying there about the new heaven, new earth, and partial preterism. I said in our video that I asked you, I said, is Tom Holland going Gnostic?
Right.
So I already understood when he's using the terms body of sin, body of death, body of flesh, and mortal body, he's saying this is a corporate body. It is the opposite of the body of Christ.
Right.
All right. And I said that he applies these concepts to the sinful mode of existence or a corporate body, the body of Adam. And I never said that when he gets into Romans 8. In fact, in another video, I quoted from my book and I quoted Holland and I said, Tom Holland, when he's in 1 Corinthians, all the way up until chapter 15, he's developing corporate body.
Yeah.
In Romans, he's developing corporate body from chapter 5 into chapter 7. And then I say he drops the ball, or I think he's inconsistent when he gets to Romans chapter 8.
Yes.
So what does Sam do? He reads Tom Holland in chapter 8. Big deal. Didn't disprove anything. You know, we're not misrepresenting him at all. We know he's a futurist. Everyone knows he's a futurist, Sam. Everyone knows he believes in a physical bodily resurrection. So to say that we can't quote futurists is totally ridiculous in the art of persuasion and debate, and no one really agrees with you on that. As far as partial preterism and the new heaven and new earth, now notice how the goalpost has been moved.
Oh yeah.
In the first video, you were stupid, you were deluded, you were Gnostic if you believed we are in the new heaven and new earth. And 2 Peter 3 was specifically brought up.
Yes.
Then Jeremiah makes a video with a partial preterist buddy of his, Trey. And Trey is acknowledging that we're in the new heaven and new earth, and that the gates of the city are open and evangelism is taking place out of Revelation 21:22. I didn't hear Jeremiah say, no, wait a second, buddy. I think you're going Gnostic.
Right.
What are we supposed to do with Jeff Durbin taking 2 Peter 3 as fulfilled in AD 70? You know, so this is where the goalpost got moved. It was, Jeremiah did it subtly. He said, well, if you don't believe that there's an already and not yet aspect to the new creation, then you're, then you're full blown stupid Gnostic and whatever. So, very subtle there, but it didn't go without me noticing.
Right. Well, and the point of fact is, everyone, well, Sam really likes to say all of this, all the commentators, every single one of them. And point of fact is, every scholar that I'm aware of across the spectrum acknowledges that, for instance, in 2 Corinthians 5:17, where Paul said, if any man is in Christ, he is new creation, that Paul is drawing on Isaiah chapter 65. Now, look, folks, if Paul believed that the new creation had already been initiated through the death, burial, resurrection of Christ, then why in the world do we not find those constituent elements of the prophecy of the new heaven and new earth of Isaiah chapter 65, which they take literally, but castigate us for doing so? Why are those literal elements not present since the establishment of the church? In other words, in the age to come, there is neither marrying nor giving in marriage. We're in the new age. We are in the age to come from Jesus's perspective. Jesus was living under the old law. Jesus was living under the time of this age, anticipating the age to come that would follow this age, which was the age of Moses and the law. So in some sense, and certainly
Didn't Joel McDermott acknowledge that we're in the age to come?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Gary DeMar acknowledges we are in the age to come. Even Kenneth Gentry acknowledges that we have our feet in two worlds, in both worlds, I believe is the way that he expresses it. Well, okay.
The creedal world and the preterist world. Gotcha.
There you go. There you go. And so my point being, if we are in the age to come, in any sense whatsoever, where do the scriptures say, well, this situation of no marrying and giving in marriage, it doesn't come into reality with the birth of the new creation. It only comes at the full end of the old creation when the new creation is full blown. Where do we find that? We don't.
We don't.
And so if you want to go down and make a list of the things that would be the constituent elements of the new heaven and new earth, since virtually all amillennialists, virtually all postmillennialists agree that we are currently in, to some degree, in somehow, some way, we are in the new heaven and new earth. Why is it, and upon what exegetical basis do they say, well, yeah, we're in the new creation, sort of, kind of, the new creation has been born, but those things don't come to fruition until the end of time. Where do you find that stuff?
Right. And the amillennialists would totally reject the partial preterist, saying that there are two passings away of the first heavens and earth in Genesis, or in Revelation 21 or 2 Peter 3, and that the text is saying there are two arrivals once the first is passed away. They would totally reject that concept of an already and not yet, to the passing away of the first heaven and earth and the arrival of the new. But they seem to want to agree to some extent that we're in the new covenant age, in the new heaven and new earth. I don't even know if an amillennialist would say we're in the new heavens and new earth. Maybe.
Yes.
I know
yes.
partial.
Yes, there's certainly some of the amillennialists who would agree that we are currently in the new heaven and new earth. Now, obviously, they would not agree that it's full blown. They would say that it began with the death and the burial and the resurrection of Christ. That is their position. That's certainly the position that I held when I was an amillennialist. So I tell you what, let's do. Let's dig deeper into this entire issue of the new heaven and the new earth, and let's do a little bit of exegesis to demonstrate how badly Sam Frost and Joseph Nortier are failing to do their homework.
Right.
Now, let's start with Isaiah 64. Now, as a backdrop to what I want to introduce, Sam Frost, in their last video, and folks, you'll have to forgive me with my coughing. I'm still trying to get over this crazy COVID stuff, and it seemed like about every other day I come up with some different little hangover symptom. And it's like, wait a minute, I haven't been doing this. So anyway, but during their video, Sam got really, really animated, and he said, "I deny that AD 70 was a coming of the Lord in any sense. I deny that it was the end of the age in any sense. I deny." And on and on. Boy, he got really animated about that. So he denied that AD 70 was a coming of the Lord. He denied that AD 70 was the end of any age. Well, it wasn't but just a few minutes later, in that same identical video, Joseph Nortier said, well,
Jeremiah.
What did I say?
Joseph.
Oh, God, sorry. Jeremiah said, now we all need to understand we are not denying that AD 70 was very, very important. And Sam's sitting over here on the split screen going, yeah, he didn't want it. Yeah, he didn't like it, but he admitted it. And Jeremiah said it was the end of the old covenant age.
Yeah, I know. He did
Wait
say
a
that.
minute.
Do you have a text for that, Jeremiah? Do you have a text for that?
Yeah. So on the one hand, here was Sam vehemently denying that AD 70 was the end of any age.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I saw that.
Jeremiah was affirming it was the end of the old covenant age.
Because he made a video with Trey
Yeah.
trying to refute us. And Trey was admitting as well that AD 70 was the end of the old covenant age.
All right. Now then, I said all of that in order to point out Sam Frost seemingly believes that there is only one coming of the Lord to bring in the new creation, right?
Yes.
Okay. Every scholar on Isaiah that I'm aware of, now, I don't have 1,000 books on Isaiah in my library, but I've got a pretty fair amount, and I've got the Logos Bible Study Program. But everyone agrees it's the coming of the Lord that would usher in, bring to full fruition the new heaven, new earth. Would you agree with that in your reading?
Exactly.
Okay. Well, let's go to Isaiah chapter 64, verse 1. Here is Isaiah acting on the part and speaking on the part of Israel. Some scholars suggest that he is uttering the voice, uttering the prayer on the behalf of Israel, pardon me, as she is downtrodden, whichever it was. Oh, that you, Isaiah, crying out to Yahweh, oh, that you would come down. Oh, excuse me. Oh, that you would rend the heavens. Well, that's 2 Peter 3, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Oh, that you would rend the heavens, that you would come down, that the mountains might shake at your presence. As fire burns brushwood, as fire causes water to boil, to make your name known to your adversaries, that the nations may tremble at your presence. Now, the word presence there in the Septuagint is prosopon. Prosopon means face, or more literally, I mean, really graphically, it's nose. I don't find a whit difference between parousia and prosopon. Now, there may be a distinction somewhere, somehow, that I have not found, but over and over and over in the Tanakh, we have the inspired writers speaking of fleeing from the presence of the Lord, prosopon. Mm-hmm. So the Old Testament translators translated the Greek prosopon as presence. Well, what does parousia mean? Presence. Now, I make that observation because here Isaiah is praying for what? For the Lord to come down, to rend the heavens, make the mountains shake, make the nations tremble at your presence. Well, again, this is certainly 2 Peter 3. It is certainly Revelation chapter 20 and the removal of heaven and earth at the end of the millennium, which ushers in what?
The resurrection.
The new heaven and a new earth. The resurrection, new heaven and new earth. Oh, but wait. I stopped reading, you see, at verse 2, so that I can now read verse 3. When you did, past tense.
Come as you have come before.
Come as you have come before. When you did awesome things for which we did not look, you came down. Now, I would remind our audience here in the book of Micah, as the Lord predicted the impending destruction of the 10 northern tribes at the hand of the Assyrians, the Lord will come down out of heaven. Now, I wonder in Sam's current definition of eschatology, which seems to change day by day, but
yes, it does.
I wonder if in his current iteration, if he acknowledges that the Lord came out of heaven and walked on the tops of the mountains in Micah chapter 1, 2 and following. Maybe he'll answer that for us.
Or if he came with fire and smoke out of his nose, out of, what is it, Psalm 18?
Psalms 18, 2 Samuel chapter 22, the parallel passage, or Isaiah chapter 30, with hail and fire and thunder and lightning.
Yes, and see, this is the issue. They're not dealing with Old Testament imminence out of Ezekiel 7, Ezekiel 12, Ezekiel 30, where the coming of the Lord, the day of the Lord is near, it's soon, and it would not be delayed. And that was fulfilled within 2 to 3 years. Okay, some say 5 years. Okay, but it's still fulfilled within the lifetime of the prophet and his contemporaries. And we have this language that is apocalyptic, it's non-literal. So and that's why these guys they haven't gone to the Old Testament on the coming of the Lord when it comes to nearness or the apocalyptic language.
Well, Sam likes to appeal to the Psalm, the Lord is near at hand, for all those who seek him. And he tries to impose that singular definition, a spatial definition of near onto all passages. That's illegitimate totality transfer. I mean, it's a horrible logical fallacy. Okay, so here's my point in Isaiah chapter 64, and we could spend a time well spent to do exactly what you're talking about there, going to Old Testament passage after Old Testament passage where the day of the Lord was at hand. It was coming soon. It was coming quickly. It was coming shortly. Oh, by the way, you brought up Ezekiel chapter 7. That's another one of those passages that Sam has just done a 180 flip-flop back and forth. I have in my files an exchange between Sam Frost and myself in which he admitted no problem whatsoever that the coming of the Lord, the end is coming. It is coming very, very soon. Used 7 times in Ezekiel chapter 7. And I asked Sam, I said, why is that language there? And he said, well, it's because the day of the Lord really was at hand. But now, of course, it's not.
Well, not when we get to the New Testament.
Not when you come to the New Testament.
That's what I pressed Michael Brown in our debate on 1 Corinthians 13. I said, you're an Old Testament scholar. Let's go to the Old Testament.
Yes.
What do you do with these coming of the Lord passages that are near in our apocalyptic language? And he just, he was all over the place. Telescope.
Yeah. In one of my debates with him, he admitted that he believed that the New Testament apostles got the timing of the coming of the Lord wrong. He just said it. Yeah. Okay. Back to Isaiah chapter 64. So here's my point. Isaiah is praying for the Lord to come. Why does he want the Lord to come? To bring in the new heaven and the new earth of Isaiah 65. But that coming of the Lord that Isaiah is praying for is indubitably and undeniably, I would challenge Jeremiah or Sam to prove otherwise. Isaiah is undeniably asking the Lord to come to the aid of Israel as he had come in the past. Lord, come down, rend the heavens, do awesome things. Lord, come as you did in the past when you did awesome things for which we did not look. Make the nations tremble at your presence. So, the coming of the Lord of Isaiah chapter 65, 64, 65, is the coming of the Lord to bring in the new heaven and the new earth. I'm assuming Sam and Jeremiah agree with that. If not, why not? Perhaps they'll make a video. Maybe they'll actually answer one of our arguments.
Yeah, they
instead
didn't.
of deflecting.
You brought up Isaiah 64 in our first video, or was it the second one? I can't remember, but they never dealt with that.
Never. Okay. So once again, the coming of the Lord of Isaiah 64 is to bring in the new heaven and the new earth of Isaiah chapter 65. But the coming of the Lord of Isaiah 64 would be a coming of the Lord as he had come in the past. Yahweh had never, ever, ever come literally, visibly, bodily out of heaven and destroyed literal physical creation in the past. Therefore, the coming of the Lord of 2 Peter 3, Revelation 21, being the coming of the Lord of Isaiah 64 to bring in the new heaven and new earth, was not going to be an end of time, earth burning, coming of the Lord, actually, visibly, bodily out of heaven at the so-called end of time. Now, they're going to have to change if they even address this. They're going to have to explain how the coming of the Lord of Isaiah 64 would be a coming of the Lord as he had come in the past, and yet it was to be the coming of the Lord to bring in the new heaven and new earth of of 2 Peter 3 and Revelation chapter 21. Where does the language of Isaiah 64, when you came down, get changed into, Lord, we want you to come out of heaven as a 5'5" Jewish man?
Yeah. And even Matthew 16:27, Jesus comes in the glory of the Father. Hey,
I've heard that term.
That sounds like a title for a good book.
Sounds like a great title for a book. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I have to tell you, when I, quote, discovered Isaiah 64, I mean, the dominoes just started falling. Bang, 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 bang. And it's fascinating to read the commentaries deal with this, of how so many wonderful scholars recognize, based on this passage, recognize that you've got all these days of the Lord in the Old Testament, in which the Lord came out of heaven and he walked on the tops of the mountains, and the mountains melted beneath his feet, and the constellations fell out of the sky or melted, as you pointed out in your recent video on Isaiah chapter 34. So here is the background for Isaiah 65. Now then, they like to talk about Isaiah chapter 65 being the seminal text for the new heaven and new earth. Sam admitted that overtly. It is the passage that the New Testament writers are appealing to. They're quoting it, they're citing it, they're alluding to it, they're echoing. But an amazing thing happened. In his comments, in a sort of kind of a way, I suppose, to try to answer something that we had said, Sam Frost says, well, you have to understand that Isaiah 65 is based upon the Deuteronomic code of the law of blessings and cursings. And God was saying, if you will obey me, you keep the law, and here's a wonderful new world that I'll create for you. But they didn't. Therefore, the promise of the new heaven and new earth of Isaiah 65 never came to fulfillment. Now, folks, you really, 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 really need to catch the power of that. Sam Frost is on record saying that the original focus of Isaiah chapter 65, the promise made to Israel, failed. Now, we understand there were conditional and unconditional promises. We understand that. The problem of trying to say that this prophecy was conditional upon Israel's obedience, it flies in the face of what the text says. Because Isaiah 65, and I'm going to hush and let you expound here, Mike. You know me, I get rolling.
No,
Isaiah 65 explicitly teaches that the new creation, instead of being postponed or failing, according to the original thrust of the prophecy, no, Isaiah 65 posits the coming of the new heaven and new earth as a direct result of Israel's disobedience and God's destruction of her. Right. It turns Sam Frost's view upside down, turns it sideways, turns it inside out. Sam Frost says the original prophecy failed because of Israel's disobedience. God says it was because of Israel's disobedience he would destroy her and create a new heaven and new earth. Gotcha. That's two diametrically opposed views. And I think I'm going to stick with Isaiah on this.
Right.
Go ahead.
Well, you brought that up in one of our previous videos. And again, they did not deal with it. And I touched it again in Daniel 12. The arrival of the new creation and the fulfillment of the resurrection does not occur until Old Covenant Israel is judged. They're synchronous events. And Paul picks this up in Acts 24:15 when he says the resurrection of Daniel 12:2 and 3 was about to be fulfilled. That resurrection of the just and the unjust was about to be fulfilled. Young's literal translation. And in the context, Paul is saying, I don't preach anything except that which is found in the law and the prophets. And he says, this resurrection that is about to take place of Daniel 12, he says, it's the hope of Israel. It's the hope of the 12 tribes. Don, do we have any 12 tribes of Israel around
here? You and I have gone over this so many times in different contexts. And I have really pressed Sam Frost repeatedly to answer the question, does national Old Covenant Israel, descended from Abraham, do they exist as a corporate body today to whom these promises were made?
Right.
Does Israel still exist?
What did he say with his amillennialism? I'm curious.
Well, of course Israel exists today because we are the true Israel of God. And he was literally, as you were saying, he's literally all over the map. Now, ladies and gentlemen, listen, as Mike was pointing out, and as I just pointed out, these promises were made to Israel. When Paul in Romans chapter 8, verse 23 says they were eagerly looking for the adoption, to wit, the redemption of the body, he then says in chapter 9 that he could bear witness of his zeal and his love for Israel, his brethren, according to the flesh, to whom pertains the adoption. What's the adoption? Redemption of the body. Okay. To whom was that promise made? Israel after the flesh. Now, unless Sam and Jeremiah can show to us that corporate national body of Israel today descended from Israel, then who are the subjects of the promise? And by the way, if you want to go to the Jewish Encyclopedia and look up the term Jew, yeah. Look up the term Israelite, you will be absolutely amazed.
Yeah.
They at Jewish Encyclopedia, ladies and gentlemen.
Not just like 5 or 6 other ones we can get that agrees with this, but they actually agree with it.
Encyclopedia Britannica, the American Encyclopedia, on and on and on. Virtually all of the major encyclopedias say there is no nation of Israel descended from Abraham that exists today. And yet the promise of the resurrection, the promise of the new heaven and the new earth was made to Old Covenant Israel descended from Abraham. Yeah. So if you don't have that nation descended by blood from Abraham, if you don't even have the righteous remnant, which Paul considered himself, seed of Abraham, a Benjamite, according to the flesh, but he was also a recipient of the promises made to Abraham. So Paul believed that those promises had to be made to Israel according to the flesh. Now, when Paul wrote Romans chapter 11, he says, now, and according to the gospel, they're enemies for the gospel. But because of God, they are beloved. Mm-hmm. But he still knew that God was faithful to Abraham and to the promises that he made to Abraham's seed according to the flesh. So again, if you do not have a corporate body of Israelites descended from Abraham according to the flesh, if you don't even have those like Paul, literal physical descendants of Abraham, then what happened to the promise?
Exactly.
And so Sam has nowhere to run, so to speak, for the application of all of these new heaven, new earth promises, resurrection promises, atonement promises. Every single soteriological and eschatological tenet was initially made to Israel after the flesh that would flow from Israel after the flesh to the nations. But it had to be delivered, as Paul said. I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Christ. Power of God to salvation to the Jew first, then to the Greek. But they had to be fulfilled for Israel, to Israel, and through Israel to flow to the nations, to flow to us. So if you don't have that physical nation, then either all of the promises were fulfilled, which means you're a full preterist, or the promises failed. Well, Sam's already on promise, or already on record saying Isaiah 65 failed because of the unbelief of Israel.
Well, what he said was, he didn't get into like a full-blown Michael Bull, James
I understand.
thing, but he was trying to say, well, when they came back from the exile, some of this covenantal language was fulfilled, but it still looks forward to the eternal state. And they conflate the eternal state with the arrival of the new heavens and the new earth.
Correct.
And so that's where, in a previous video, I'll just briefly read this, but Kenneth Gentry, responding to the amillennialists here, he said, and he's referring to Jay Adams, he says, Adams defends the amillennial interpretation of these elements with a rhetorical question, quote, how else can perfection be described in words which have imperfect objects and concepts as references? The answer is easily. Surely it is not impossible to think of post-resurrection perfection without mentioning 6 elements of temporal imperfection in the same sentence. Could Isaiah not say that in the eternal consummate state, or the new heavens and new earth, no infants will be born, no one will age, no sin will exist, and the cursed forever ceases? What is so difficult with starting matters in this way? And then he says, the new heavens and the new earth here and many places elsewhere, of course, he doesn't want to get into 2 Peter 3, refer to the new covenant era, all right, that we're in. It characterizes the system-wide transformation that occurs with the coming and spread of the gospel in today in the new covenant age. Yep. So, Sam is talking about, first they criticize us for saying these full preterists, they spiritualize everything. So now we're in Isaiah 65. We've made the challenge, and now we're told that we're not literal enough, or that we're too literal. Yeah. He says this is poetic language. These hyper-preterists, they're impressing too much literalism here. It's like, well, you can't have your cake and eat it too. And he admits that this language can be poetic, can be spiritual, can be referring to physical things as well. So, either you fix the problem with the consistency, or all eschatological systems go back and forth with the consistency. No one disagrees that this is covenantal language. No one disagrees that it's poetic language. The question is it poetic language talking about the end of time and the eternal state, heaven, quote unquote, Or is this poetic language describing life in the kingdom today, in Christ, in that spiritual kingdom, in the spiritual new heaven and new earth?
Points well taken. And let's point something out. 2 points I want to make. Sam Frost tried to say that, well, preterists are inconsistent because they insist on infants, thus procreation in the new creation. They take that literally. And then you have sinners, who are dying. They take that literally. Therefore, there's sin in the new creation. Well, by the way, in Isaiah 66, well, we're almost out of time here, Mike, and we got to get to Isaiah 66. But nonetheless, so he jumps over to the end of the chapter where there's no more tears. And he said, now, see, they spiritualize that. Well, what Sam is failing to realize, whether or not he knows it, I do not know. I don't remember Sam ever, speaking on this particular subject. But throughout the Old Testament, and there are several different places where the terminology of no more tears is used, but it is used in context in which the oppression of the moment, the situation of the moment, as it were, that is causing the tears, causing the sorrow, causing the problem and the sadness, is overcome. Therefore, the promise is made that when that situation ends, for instance, when the Babylonian captivity is over, there would be no more tears. It doesn't mean, well, if you're on your way back to Jerusalem from the Babylonian captivity and an infant dies, that doesn't mean you're not going to have literal physical tears. That would be rather silly. That would be to overlook human nature. It's just simply acknowledging the fact that the Old Testament over and over discusses and addresses a given stressful circumstance that is the cause of sorrow, that is the cause of tears, and promises this will pass and there will be no more tears.
Yeah. I mean, I listen to you talk and describe that. I mean, I even learned that. I think in my book, I did refer to no death, no tears, and no pain as an inner, kind of like the Romans 8, groaning from internal vanity, waiting for the forgiveness of sins. And then when the forgiveness of sins is now present, yeah, I don't cry waiting for Messiah to forgive my sins. I don't have this internal pain waiting for that. But now, see, you brought a whole new light on that, and it's tears from a very specific
correct
persecution or day of the Lord or judgment, and then
correct.
you're on the other side of that. That doesn't mean you're never going to be persecuted again, and you're
Right.
not going to. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah. Second point I want to make, and it addresses what you brought up a few moments ago, that Isaiah chapter 65 is a covenantal situation. Now, remember, folks, Jesus said, heaven and earth will pass away. My word will never pass away. But guess what? Sam and Jeremiah believe that the end of the Christian age is coming. It's still future. So Jesus's words will pass away. Now, they don't like to talk about that. They like to say, no. We're not saying the kingdom comes to an end. We're not saying Jesus's words pass away. Well, what they do say is that in the new heaven, new earth, there's no evangelism because there's no sin. So there's no need for the gospel. So if there's no need for the gospel passes away. The gospel no longer functions as it was established to function. How was the gospel established? To evangelize and to bring sinners to Christ. It will no longer function.
Yeah, we haven't gotten any response why there is evangelism taking place after the passing away of the first heavens and earth.
That's right.
And the arrival of the new.
Right.
Not an already, not yet.
And as a segue to that, here in Isaiah chapter 65, the Lord, in speaking of the coming of this new creation, I'm going to begin reading with verse 16, after saying in verses 13 and following, behold, my servant shall eat, you shall be hungry. My servant shall drink, you shall be thirsty. Now, folks, this is a messianic banquet.
Yeah,
This is a messianic wedding banquet. This is Revelation 19. This is Matthew 22, on and on. Okay, so all of these blessings would come on the followers of Christ. When the Lord would destroy Israel for her disobedience. Unlike Sam, who says the new heaven and new earth, as promised here, could not come because of Israel's disobedience, it would come when God punished her for her disobedience. So he says, so that the one who blesses himself in the earth shall bless himself in the God of truth. The one who swears in the earth shall swear by the God of truth, because, now watch this, the former troubles are forgotten, and because they're hidden from my eyes. Now, you see, this is talking about former trouble, not being remembered. This is no more tears, basically. But watch this.
Is this when the tribulation that's spanning throughout all the age here has ended?
Must be, according to Sam.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
When the Christian age, which Sam identifies as the Great Tribulation, following Greg Beale, I'm assuming, on that. Anyway,
trying to.
For behold, I create new heaven and new earth. Now watch this, folks. And the former what? Well, this is an ellipsis. The former heaven and earth shall not be remembered. So we have the promise of a new heaven and a new earth, which they take to be literal. Actually, they take the earth as renovated. But nonetheless, it's a new heaven and a new earth as opposed to the old. And the Lord says the old shall not be remembered. Now, here's something you need to know. I think I mentioned this maybe even in our very first video. The word remembered here is from the Hebrew word zakar. Zakar means to bring something to mind covenantally. It means to bring the blessings of a covenant to mind, or to bring the cursings of a covenant to mind. When Israel was faithful, God remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, with Jacob, etc. The word zakar can, in a few instances, not many, but it can refer to simple mental recall. Okay, that's fine. Just like, oh, man, I remember, I got to go to the grocery store. Big deal. It is used commonly, extremely commonly, to speak of a covenantal remembrance. So here, God is promising a new heaven, new earth, but the former heaven and earth will not be remembered covenantally. That means that the former heaven and the former earth is a covenantal creation.
Isaiah 52, verses 15 and 16.
51.
To John Owen.
Yeah.
John Lightfoot.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. God created Israel's heaven and earth when he put his law in their hearts and in their mouth, and said to Zion, you are my people. And he did that to establish the heavens and to lay the foundation of the earth. Folks, just go read it. Isaiah 51, 15 and 16.
I think Isaiah was being Gnostic there. You got to be careful.
Well, you may have a point.
Now, Don, I mean, you're teaching covenant eschatology. I thought that we only had time text. I thought everything we do is time text. But what you're pointing out is that the time texts are inseparably connected to the judgment of Old Covenant Israel as a heavens and earth, and the arrival of the New Covenant heavens and earth, which is the establishment of the church, or the maturity of the church.
Amen. Yeah, every time I hear Sam Frost say the only thing that preterists have are the time statements, I literally just shudder, because he knows that's not true. Or if he genuinely believes that, he has deceived himself into believing that. Or if, when he was a preterist, he believed that all we had was time statements, then he didn't know preterism very well, even though he assures us that he knows it inside and out, up and down.
Well, Don, while we're in Isaiah 65, let's point out that while Sam was claiming to be a full preterist, he was trying to marry postmillennialism and full preterism, and he was taking the long ages here in Isaiah 65 as Well, this hasn't been fulfilled yet. Someday in the future, we're all going to be living to be 900 years old again.
Right.
And I was like, Sam, you can't, that's ridiculous. That's not full preterism either on interpreting it spiritually or the timing of it. I mean, this is crazy. So how are you going to take the wolf laying down with the lamb, or the child playing with poisonous snakes? I mean, are you going to say that carnivores, their anatomy is completely going to be changing, when we're starting to live to be 900 years old? I mean, where is this going? And first he repented from it. He says, I see it, you're right. And then shortly after that, he began doubling down and getting his Clark philosophy, and he was gone.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember a little bit of that. I know he and I stood in Alan Bondar's kitchen several years ago, and he discussed some of this. And like you, I pointed out the incredible fallacies of what he was saying, and he immediately backtracked. He said, "No. I'm absolutely a full preterist. I'm not saying I'm not a full preterist." I
No,
said,
he
"Sam,
wasn't. He deceived us to get
yeah."
in our
I
book.
said, "Sam, if you take that position, then you're not a full preterist. Pure and simple, you're not a full preterist." "Oh, no, I'm a full preterist." And it wasn't very long after that, of course, that he was not a full preterist. Now, let me go back, double back on this, and point out Isaiah says that when the new heaven and new earth comes, the original or the first heaven and earth will not be remembered. Now, if we're waiting for the arrival of a new heaven and new earth, if it's out there in our future, then that must mean that the current heaven and earth, the heavens and earth that now are, to use the terminology of 2 Peter chapter 3, that means that the current covenant world of Jesus Christ, when the new heaven and new earth comes, the gospel will no longer be remembered. Wait a minute. That's a little troublesome.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little troublesome because according to Isaiah chapter 66, and we may have to do an entire program on Isaiah 66, because to say that Isaiah 66 is troublesome for Sam Frost and Jeremiah Nortier on the new creation is a humongous understatement. There's just so much there that completely decimates their view, in my estimation. So anyway, in Isaiah 66, now imagine again, ladies and gentlemen, Sam Frost and Jeremiah Nortier say we're waiting on new heaven and new earth, a literal new heaven, new earth. Well, Isaiah 65 is their passage of appeal. That means that when this proposed new heaven, new earth comes at the end of the current Christian age, that means the Christian gospel, the new covenant, which is the basis for this current age, it means the gospel will no longer be remembered. Or would they double down and say, no, it's just simply talk about the physical dirt and the physical, stuff? Well, sorry, that's not Zakar. That, the literal physical dirt and the literal physical stars, so far as I am aware, don't have a covenant with God. They might appeal to Genesis 9, but I don't think that applies here because you're going to destroy the earth in their paradigm or remake it. So anyway, this whole concept of the remembrance of the covenant is so critical in Isaiah chapter 65. When the new heaven and the new earth would come, the former heaven and the former earth would pass away and no longer be remembered. So the question to Sam and Jeremiah would be, is the gospel that creates the new covenant world of Jesus Christ? And let's not forget, in Galatians chapter 6, 15 and 16, Paul, addressing the issue between the old covenant world of Israel, where circumcision was the identifying marker, one of them, and the new covenant world of Jesus Christ, where spiritual circumcision is the spiritual marker for those who follow Jesus Christ. Paul said, neither circumcision nor uncircumcision avails anything. The physical doesn't amount to anything, but the new creation. Paul Ochtermeyer, I believe it's Ochtermeyer, in his book, The Triumph of the God of Abraham, marvelous book. Wow, it's good. I mean, you talk about rich with wonderful quotes. And I know Sam says we can't quote futurists to support our view, but in spite of what Sam claims, yes, we can.
Yeah.
Because Ochtermeyer, F.F. Bruce makes the same comment in his comment or commentary on Galatians, that for Paul, the new creation is a creation in which physical circumcision is no longer the identifying marker of God's people. Faith is the identifying marker of God's people. Now, look, here are two futurists saying that the new creation is here now. And the characteristic of it is physical circumcision means nothing, but faith in Christ means everything. That's the new creation.
A spiritual circumcision? You sure it's not
a spiritual circumcision?
You're going Gnostic?
Yeah.
A spiritual birth, a spiritual
birth, spiritual resurrection,
spiritual temple. So we have all these spiritual things, but we can't have a spiritual heavens and earth.
Right. Yeah.
That houses all of those spiritual things.
Yeah. Exactly right. Okay, look, is there something else you want to cover? I can feel my voice failing on me here. So
okay. No, I did want you to cover, though, because I think you do a great job, and we should do another video on Isaiah 66 and 2 Thessalonians 1, and how Sam has come up, just invented something. It's just something we have to deal with.
Oh, I agree. And but like I said, I can actually feel my voice closing down on me here. I do apologize. We put in a good hour here. Folks, look, what have we done? We pointed out how Sam and Jeremiah have absolutely failed to address the key points that we've made. They have deflected attention away from what we did say, and they've made arguments against what we didn't say. And I must say this, I got to make a political statement. I'm reminded of some politicians when an interviewer asked them a question about subject X, and they go off and expound for 15 minutes on subject X, Y, or double D or whatever.
Yeah, they have their talking points.
They have their talking points, and that's exactly what they did in their last video. They did not address. Now, look, we did not get back to Ecclesiastes chapter 3 or
Revelation 10:6.
10:6. I do have to make this observation, but before we go, in their very first video, Sam Frost said on Ecclesiastes chapter 1 and verse 4, generations come, generations go, but the earth abides forever. And Jeremiah said, hey, look, Sam, full preterist appeal to this and says, see, the earth abides forever. And Sam goes, well, it does. That's the new heaven and new earth. That's the new earth. And I still think that Jeremiah reacted to that like, really?
Well, I think he was like, he thought that this was a mic drop moment. I think when he did this, I think he's like, yeah, you got him, Sam.
Yeah,
you got him.
Could
That's
be.
Why.
Yeah, it could be. So what happens in their next video? They bring up, Jeremiah brought up Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verse 4 again. And what does Sam do? Well, I call this a debate conversion. And the reason I call it that is because while we're not, in a face-to-face conversion with the debate with them, remember in the first video, the earth abiding forever is the new earth and the new heaven and new earth. But in their second video, when Jeremiah brought up Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verse 4, Sam goes off and expounds on the fact that, well, all in the world that means is for the Jews, pardon me, for the Jews, earth was the most steady, unmoving thing that they knew. Not one word about the new heaven and the new earth being the earth of Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verse 4. So
you mean they're reading something into that?
Could be. I'm pretty sure it's true. So why, if Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verse 4 is in fact a reference to the new earth of the new creation of Isaiah 65, 2 Peter 3, etc., if that really was Sam's position, which he stated very clearly, then why didn't he double down on it and give us evidence for that in the video number 2, instead of saying, well, all in the world it means is that he was saying that the earth is the most stable thing that the Jews knew of. You know, people come, people go, generations come, generations go, but the earth's always here. Not one single word about the new earth. So that's why I refer to it as a, quote, debate conversion. He did not want to go back and make the argument that the earth of Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verse 4 is the new earth. Now, if he still believes that, if they make another video, maybe he can give us some evidence for that. But he didn't offer anything. In fact, he surely seemed to abandon that view in video number 2.
And while we're in Ecclesiastes real quick, Ecclesiastes 3:11, the goalpost got moved once again. Before it was like, every scholar in the entire world agrees with me. This passage can't mean anything else other than the end of world history. So I find in 2 minutes a translation,
which they ridiculed.
Right. And so they're in trouble. And so Sam moves it to, well, I'm glad they found it because this is the most horrible translation. Okay. And then I love the straw man. Like, Jeremiah acts as if I said, which I did not say. He acts as if I said, and their lives, the end of their lives is in the original Hebrew. I never said that.
Yeah.
Everyone knows, anyone that has studied knows that translations often function as interpretations. So, you know, they thought that they had it there. And of course, I found another commentary since then that says this could either be the end of their lives or the end of world history. Now, that commentary, because it's a futures commentary, went in the direction of the end of world history, but they acknowledged, well, in the context, it very well could be the end of someone's life.
Yeah, and let's point out, you ever so briefly touched on it, but they said the end of man's life is not there. It's just not there. It's not in the text. Well, guess what? End of time is not in the text either.
No, yeah.
So
that's not in the original Hebrew.
It's
either.
not in the original Hebrew text. So they were trying to make a point to condemn us because they claim, oh, see, they're inserting words into the text because end of man's life is not in the text. But guess what, ladies and gentlemen? End of time is not in the original Hebrew text either. So we are duty bound as exegetes to determine from the context what is the very best application. Now, Sam is absolutely desperate to find end of time somewhere, somehow, some way. And so he ignores all of the statements. To every time, for everything, there is a purpose and a time for everything under the sun. And every single thing, there's a time to be born, a time to die, a time to rejoice, a time to be sorrowful. Every single thing that the writer says from beginning to end has to do with man's life under the sun.
Exactly.
And so, okay. All right. Listen, folks, thanks so much for joining us here tonight. I apologize for my throat. It's just, I don't know what it sounds like, to be honest, but I know what it feels like. So anyway, Mike, it's great to be with you again. I've enjoyed it a great deal, and we'll do this again very, very soon.
Amen. Look forward to it.
You bet. Bingo.